today. Rabbi Sachs has been present, his memory has been mentioned, his Torah has been all over Efrat. And I cannot remember the last time that I felt the community spreading all the way from the Dagan to the Rimon. And I think it's been a tremendous effort, and I'm really, really grateful to everybody. There are so many thank yous to say tonight. First of all, I have to thank Aria and Yocheved Fund for dedicating this evening in memory of Aria's parents, David and Norma Fund. And without them, this wouldn't be. I have to say thank you to Diana Rosenfeld, who had this idea, to Sarah Tesla, who the chair of the Women's Beit Midrash board, who started pushing. I think it was Pesach time. And we didn't know how it was going to happen, but we came back to the idea in the summer and said, we have to make this happen. When could we start? After Rosh Hashanah. How will we put it together with the Chagim and after the Chagim? And we just said, we're going to push and push and push. So thank you to Diana, thank you to Sarah, thank you to Chamutal, the Rosh Beit Midrash. Thank you to Bate Hefta for hosting Gila, for the sound system, and for all our speakers tonight, who Sarah will introduce in a second. I think that's who I had to thank. If I've forgotten anybody, Aliza, thank you very much for the enormous amount of effort that you put in tonight. Rabbi Sachs's last book, Morality, is the book of a man on a crusade. It looks at all the ills of today's society and says, we can put this back together. We can fight against the isolation, which is breaking up community. We can fight against the social media, which I don't know why we call it social media. We should be calling it anti-social media, which is putting everybody into little bubbles and breaking down the personal relationships which make community and allow us to make a better world. I listened to that book on Audible. I think it was the last thing that he recorded. And it was clearly an effort. When Rabbi Sachs spoke, and I heard him on many occasions, he never put a breath in the wrong place. And here and there in the recording of morality, he has to take an extra breath before the end of a sentence. But it was clearly a book that he felt the world had to hear. This is one of the first, this is, I think, one of the biggest event that the Beit Midrash has had since Corona. And I think it's totally fitting that in Rabbi Sachs's memory, we start working hard to bring people out and together in public spaces and see each other again and talk to each other again and begin to rebuild community. As Rabbi Sachs put it, to heal a fractured world. Our MCs for tonight is Sarah Tesla. She's going to run things between our speakers, and handing over to Daniel.
Well, we're going to start with a little introduction. So we have Daniel Rose, the director of the Rabbi Sachs Legacy Trust. We're thrilled to have Gila Fine, the editor-in-chief of Minded Books, on some side, and Chazan Shimon Craimer, personal close friend from Riverdale, and also a close friend of Rabbi Sachs. So we're going to start with everyone just giving a brief introduction, and then I'll ask some questions off from the side just to help facilitate things. So Gila, why don't you start?
Shabbat tov. Can you hear me? So 9 years ago, I emceed my first book launch with Rabbi Sachs. It was a very large event, and I had the honor of introducing him to the crowd. And I stood there on stage and said that I don't quite know how one begins to describe the giant that is Rabbi Sachs. 9 years, 16 books, and several launches later, I still don't know how long it is to describe the giants. It is Rabbi Sachs. He was so larger than life. His list of achievements was so endless that every time you spoke about him, it kind of sounded like a eulogy, even when he was standing right there. There are many superlatives he was given during his lifetime, and I inevitably ended up using many of these myself. I would say about him that he was, I still can't talk about him in the past tense, he was the most distinguished Jewish thinker of our time, whose books were read by millions in and outside of the fold. I said that he was the most prominent spokesman of Judaism in our day, representing the Jewish religion to presidents and popes, in parliaments, in senates, in academia, and cross-world media. And I would say that he was the most influential Jewish leader of our generation, an international, cross-denominational rabbi, a source of strength and inspiration for Jews worldwide. So those were the superlatives, but I know that tonight is meant to be more personal. So what about the man behind the superlatives? How do you eulogize somebody who was so often eulogized during his lifetime? In To Heal a Fractured World, Rabbi Sachs writes, telling stories is one of the best ways of making a moral point. Behind the superlatives, there are stories. And so I'm going to tell you mine. My first meeting with Rabbi Sachs was profoundly disorienting. I remember walking out with an acute sense of vertigo. It was as if somebody had taken the universe and stretched out its scale, and everything that used to be a 9 was now a 6. He set such a towering example, provided such a high bar. I never really believed the hagiographical legends of Gdolim of ages past. People, I thought, were never that intellectually and morally superior. No Kubidi could be so great a saint and so brilliant a scholar. And then I discovered they could be, because there was Rabbi Sachs. To paraphrase a quote Rabbi Sachs himself loved, Rabbi Sachs might have been born great, might have had greatness thrust upon him, but his greatness ultimately was something he achieved. Rabbi Sachs worked harder and pushed himself further than anyone I'd ever met. He never rested on his laurels, even when he had more laurels than he knew what to do with. Every achievement became a new starting point. Every success was another standard he had to surpass. He had a profound sense of duty, this urgent need to do what good he could wherever he was most needed. The fate of the Jewish people, and I should say of the world, bothered Rabbi Sachs personally. He was a terrible insomniac. And he never stopped searching, asking where he could most be of service. And for every celebrated 1,000-person lecture or mass media performance, there were also many one-on-one meetings where, unreported and unsung, Rabbi Sachs gave of himself to others in need. Rabbi Sachs dedicated his life to us. And he did all he could. He did above and beyond all he could. for our sake. We were incredibly lucky to have lived in his generation, to have had his leadership and his inspiration. And now I think it's up to us to justify it. Now we must become great ourselves. Because we can be. Because there was Rabbi Sachs.
Hi, good evening, Shavuot Tov. First of all, it's thrilled to be back in Efrat. I feel like I've come home. I learned in yeshiva too many years ago to admit when there wasn't this shkuna or half of it, and it always feels like a homecoming. So I'm thrilled to be back here. I'm also thrilled that the larger community of Efrat put on this wonderful Shabbat of learning in honor of Rabbi Sachs as part of this global program that I'll tell you a little bit about and refer to as part of my work, which is called Communities in Conversation, where communities literally around the world, from New Zealand all the way across through Europe and Israel and all the way to the United States of America and beyond, to learn some of Rabbi Sachs' Torah and his memory, his honor on his Yartzeit that was this week. So it's wonderful to be part of this, and it's wonderful for us. The list, I don't know if any of you saw the list, they published it on the list of communities was magnificent, and I'm proud to be part of the this is probably the last in the so that's I think Achon Chavin. So my personal story, I'll tell a little bit about me, and then my relationship with Rabbi Sachs, and then my personal kind of, I don't think any one person has a right or an ability to sum up Rabbi Sachs, certainly not in one evening, in one 5-minute introduction. So I grew up, as you can hear, in London. I was the generation, I was a teenager when he became chief rabbi, so he was our chief rabbi, we would call him Chiefy Sachs, probably because of through B'nai Akiva, and that in itself, he would, our generation had access to him because I'm sure there must be people advising him not to spend quite this much time in the B'nai Akiva Bayit, but he was there the whole time. There's nothing that he loved more than being with young people, the next generation of Jewish leaders. So he would give shiurim at the Bayit the whole time. And so when we all came back from yeshiva and he was already in his stride of being chief rabbi, we would get to hear him and ask questions to him, this person who was becoming this global leader. So that was, I think I fell in love with his thought before I fell in love with him as a person and as an orator. Before I heard him speak, I was already reading his books. And then I got this opportunity to access him, not, as we all did, everyone of our generation in London. Then I made Aliyah, and on some level I had to let go of that. And I have no regrets, obviously. But as an educator, I was an educator here. I've been a Jewish educator all my adult life. In fact, I say from when I was 15, from when I was in Madrid. I know that my peers in London had more access to him because he would open his house to them. He would bring in Jewish educators. He always had a special place in his heart for Jewish educators and the Jewish leaders, and he wanted desperately to be a resource for them. And in fact, that's how I managed to then not reconnect, but connect on a more intimate level with him. Some 5 years ago, he put out a message on Facebook video saying, I very much want to be a resource for Jewish educators the world around, but I need to know how. So please tell me, write in, message us, tell us what I can do to help you as Jewish educators. So I happen to know personally his staff, his chief of staff, John Van Arosh, and then I think he was called senior advisor, Dan Saka, was my Chanit in Akiva. And I wrote to them straight away and I said, I've got ideas. I've always had a dream of taking Rabbi Sachs' ideas and adapting them to a younger audience. And so I bombarded them with ideas, and eventually they weren't quite ready then, but some year later, I think, we sat down and we started planning, and that's where I became part of his team, despite living here, and got this tremendous privilege, probably the greatest privilege that will be for my career. So that's my relationship to him, and I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to share more personal stories. I just wanted to share an idea from him. Actually, I wanted to share 3 ideas. I'm not going to do that at time. But if I think about Rabbi Sachs, I think about him as a rabbi, as a philosopher, and as a mensch. And I want to focus on him as a mensch. But there are two Divrei Torah that I'm not going to give, but I want to give you homework. I want you to go away and look them up there. His covenant conversation, it's all really accessible on the website, and Cohen published it in beautiful books. And the one I've been teaching this week from Parshat Chai Sarah, we're still not to Shabbat, so I feel like I can still give the talk in this Shabbat, is beginning the journey, where he basically asked this wonderful question. We see Avram mourning his wife Sarah, but we see it in one pasuk. Now we don't know. That doesn't mean that it was an easy mourning for him, and the grief wasn't real, and it didn't last for a full year or longer. All we know is the Torah only gives us a pasuk of his grief, and then 2 long prakim about what he does next. His action. He goes into action. He goes and he negotiates over Stefan, Marta Machpelah from Efrat in Stefan. That's an entire perek with a lot of intricate detail, and then the very next perek, which starts actually with him, with the Torah telling us that Avram was advanced in age, and you think it's almost like introducing his death, but we don't see his death. We see then the next thing he goes into action. He sends Elazar out to find a wife for Yitzhak. So Rabbi Sachs says, this is really interesting. This is the one I'm not giving. Sorry. Basically, Rabbi Sachs, so many of his philosophical ideas are found in this covenant conversation, written in this beautiful way that everyone can access it. You want to hear the full idea, so I can tell you all the books. But he talks about Avram realizing that you're not going to finish everything in life. You have to have faith. He contrasts faith and optimism. Hope and optimism. Hope is something you can do something about. Optimism is you sit back and you say, I'm sure it'll be fine, but there's nothing you can do about it. This is Avram showing hope, showing faith in Hashem, that the promises that Hashem has given him will happen. But most importantly, this is Rabbi Sachs' message, is taking the first step. It's a partnership between man and Hashem. So Hashem can promise him land and promise him descendants, but unless Avram steps up and takes the first step, it's not going to happen. So that's Rabbi Sachs, the philosopher, who writes philosophy in the most wonderful and beautifully written but complex books, but also every week an essay, Divrei Torah and the Parsha that anyone can read and still get the same ideas in a more accessible way. That's Rabbi Sachs, the philosopher. Rabbi Sachs, the rabbi. So I won't say this Divrei Torah, but if any of you saw the video that his daughter Gila put out, which actually was to thank all communities for doing what we're doing. So she put out this beautiful video where she gave a Divrei Torah that was, I can only imagine her father looking down from Shemayim with tremendous pride, because she almost out-Sachsed Rabbi Sachs. She took a Rabbi Sachs idea from another covenant conversation on Parsha Chayesah, where he talks about Yitzchak, the model of tefillah that Yitzchak represents, which is sicha and conversation. So it's a beautiful Torah. Right? It's actually only one idea. I went back to read it over Shabbat, the full Torah. She picked one idea. There were so many ideas in that Parsha. She picked one idea out because it linked so beautifully to, first of all, Rabbi Sachs as a person and as a leader and as a philosopher, but also this week's Parsha and also this project, Communities Conversation. And she talked about how conversation was important for Rabbi Sachs because the Gemara that discusses where we get tefillah from, is it from the Avot or is it from Korbanot? It's so the Shita that says it's from Avot says that Yitzchak Sicha Ein Sicha Ela Tefillah. So Sicha is Tefillah. Tefillah, when we go and daven, it's a conversation to us and Hashem. And that in itself is a beautiful idea. It's a two-way street. It's a conversation. But Rabbi Sachs says conversation. Tefillah is a conversation, but conversation itself can be a tefillah. And then Gila took this idea further. I thought it would. When I looked to see if it was in the Divrei Torah. It wasn't. She's really taking it further, and I'm saying it in her name and then in her father's name. Conversation itself, when you open yourself up to someone else and to their ideas and to the Tselem Elokim in them, then the actual art of conversing with someone can be a tefillah, can be a form of spiritual devotion. Such a powerful, beautiful idea. And she talked about, and I've heard her talk about other times. Go check out her speech at the Templeton Prize giving, where she talks about her father being someone, someone who learns from absolutely, there's something to learn about everything and everyone. But he also taught everyone. His Judaism was something that he felt was relevant to the entire world, Jew and non-Jew alike. Okay, number 3. I won't give this just like I didn't give the other 3. This is Rabbi Sachs the Ben Adam. I was saying to Sarah just before, when he died, there were so many stories about people that had intimate access, or he he and his staff opened his door to them, so that they needed a one-on-one conversation, he would give it. For sure, educators and leaders, but even regular people. He was someone that connected to people, and I'm not sure it was completely natural for him at the beginning of his career. I think it's something that he worked on, and this little story that I'm going to tell you, I think captures it. He writes about, or speaks about, also I heard, when he became chief rabbi, he started giving drashot all over the country and ultimately all over the world. And he really invested a lot in giving these drashot, these sermons. And after he'd given the sermon, and then, no doubt, kiddush after shul, everyone would come up and speak to him. No one wanted to ask any questions on the drashot. No one was interested in that. What questions did they ask? They wanted to know if he remembered them, or if he knew their uncle, or their brother, or someone he was. They wanted a personal connection with him, and he realized that was as much of an important part of his role, seeing people, connecting to people, as it was giving the inspiring drashot and writing books. And in fact, he says that that's when he understood the third section of the Kohanim. Yisah Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom, that Hashem should turn his face upon you. And then that will grant you peace. What does that mean? It means that every human being has a need to be seen, and that will bring them peace. And if we live in a world and we have a relationship with Hashem, where Hashem sees us, that's going to bring us peace. And he realized that was an important part of his role as well as chief rabbi. So that's Rabbi Sachs to mention these stories that I'd never heard of, and maybe we'll be able to share some of them of him doing that. I think were perhaps the most inspiring of all the Rabbi Sachses that I know and have impacted.
How long have we got?
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Hi, Shimon Craimer. I never sweated so much trying to get keyboard to work, and unfortunately it doesn't work. So I think my role tonight, thank you, Sarah, for inviting me, is to provide some musical interludes in the Rabbi Sachs way, using some of the songs that he loved and some of the songs that we worked on together. But I just wrote a few things down in 2 minutes. I'll miss Rabbi Sachs for so many reasons. In a way, I feel like I'm very privileged to miss him from not only an inspirational perspective, but also as a close friend. So many hundreds of thousands of people around the world will miss him in their own way. But for me, I was lucky enough, thanks to Rabbi Lana Rosenfeld. I'm sure you know Rabbi Lana Rosenfeld. It's nice to see so many familiar faces here tonight as well. To have been introduced to Rabbi Sachs by Lionel at the very young age of 18, when Rabbi Lionel asked me to join him at the annual National Slichot service, in which Rabbi Sachs gave the address. We struck a friendship straight away. I was instantly drawn to his presence just by the way he used to say my name. He used to go, Shimon. That's what he used to call me. He taught me, inspired me, and worked with me, and helped me, and was there for me. I could go on forever, but just want to focus for 1 second on his knowledge and understanding of music. I'll always remember that one thing he taught me that I still strive to reach every time I open my mouth. He always used to say, with the gift that God has given you, inspire people through the simplicity of music. Music does not need to be complicated. Use every note to touch people's hearts. As long as they can feel your soul, you're using your gift in the right way. And to quote one of Rabbi Sachs's famous lines, words are the language of the mind. Music is the language of the soul. Rabbi Sachs hit the nail on the head, understanding the power of music, and I was humbled to help him to relay that message in many ways. And I'll move that examples later after some of the questions. But I just wanted to say that, Rabbi Sachs, one of the songs that I'm going to sing for you is later, which worked much better with a keyboard, unfortunately it doesn't work, is a song called When You Believe, which is a song that Rabbi Sachs chose for a project that we did together called Home of Hope, which I don't know if any of you have the CD there, it's a double CD. And I just wanted to say that, the words were, who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe. So in my way, I think Rabbi Sachs was everyone's miracle. I will know no one else who inspired me and taught me and understood me in a way that pushed me to do better and to try and continue the miracle that is life, living at the fullest, and to inspire others with the gifts that God gave me. There's a huge hole in my heart, and I know I cannot fill it properly now that my mentor and inspiration has left us. but I will try to use everything he taught me to inspire for years to come. So may Rabbi Sachs's memory be a blessing and a source of comfort to Lady Elaine and all the family and to the entire world. And I'll miss him dearly. So that's my introduction, but just to say, I think the questions that Sarah going to ask are more for the two people sitting beside me. I'll try and answer as I can, but interspersed between those questions, we'll do some music together, we'll sing some songs together.
And Shim, we promise.
Oh, sorry.
No, we promise. I need everyone to sing along with Shim.
Yes.
He doesn't have a keyboard and he's not gonna want to stand up here belting out a song by himself. So we will be your music, or maybe he does actually, take that back. I know Shim.
I'm kidding.
So my first question is, what was the transition like for Rabbi Sachs going from a pulpit rabbi to then chief rabbi and then what I call international celebrity rabbi, since he really was a celebrity? Was he surprised by it himself? Did it change? Did it affect the way, the things that he could say in public? So I don't know at what stage each of you knew him. You can comment about, what you saw and if he ever commented on it. And remember, I have a lot of questions, so keep it down to like 2-3 minutes each.
2 minutes each, okay. So to answer the second question, yes, absolutely. I think no one was more surprised that Rabbi Sachs became Rabbi Sachs than Rabbi Sachs himself. He said about himself, and I'm basically going to paraphrase a lot of things that he has said in the past, that he was never on a track toward rabbinic leadership. That was not his childhood. It was not the way he was brought up. It was not where he was going. He grew up thinking he was going to be either an academic philosopher or an economist or a lawyer. And then he ended up an international celebrity rabbi, as you say, Sarah. And I'm sure there are many important moments on the way there, but I'm gonna highlight 2. One which he discusses a lot and one which he barely talks about, but I think these 2 are key. The first one, which he discusses quite a bit, and I'm sure it's familiar to many of you, was that fateful meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. As a student in Cambridge, Rabbi Sachs, he experienced quite acutely the Jewish revival that followed the 6-day war, and he decided he needed to go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe to speak to him about his future and what he was going to do when he grew up. And he found that when meeting the Rebbe, instead of the Rebbe answering his questions, the Rebbe sort of started questioning him about what he was doing for Jewish life in Cambridge. And that kind of pushed him onto the track of rabbinic leadership, which again was never something he thought of doing. And he uses that very much as a way of speaking about how leaders create followers, but great leaders create other leaders. He really saw himself as being created as a leader because of the leadership of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The second moment, which he doesn't speak about as much, but I think might be even more important, was with the 2002 publication of Dignity of Difference. I mentioned this earlier today for those who were there, but I'll repeat. In 2002, in response to 9/11, Rabbi Sachs publishes Dignity of Difference as an attempt to essentially answer the question of religious violence. And in chapter 3, he writes what was considered incredibly daring for an Orthodox rabbi, certainly an Orthodox chief rabbi, to say, and that is that different faith traditions, Christianity, Islam, provide different pathways to God. Essentially granting religious validity to other religions. And he was, to borrow a phrase from another religion, crucified as a result. He was attacked viciously, very personally. There were calls for his resignation. And Rabbi Sachs, in rare moments, speaks about the despair he landed into as a result of this attack. He said he didn't know how to move forward from that moment. He was crushed. He thought very seriously about stepping down. And he says, at that moment, it was the closest he ever got to hearing a voice from above. He was hit by the realization that if he resigned, it wouldn't just be him personally stepping down. He would be letting down all the people behind him, all of his followers, his tzibur, as it were. And at that moment, he said, he realized what leadership was about. It wasn't about the leader. It wasn't personal. It was about everybody who was following. And I think it's not for nothing that from that moment on, we see his meteoric rise from just another chief rabbi to world's chief rabbi. We would laugh that he's the closest thing we've got to a pope. So his transition, whether he was surprised, and did he have to change what he said? Well, I just mentioned dignity of difference, and it's an open secret that he revised dignity of difference for the second edition. I'll say this, I don't think for a second Rabbi Sachs changed what he had to say. I think he became more nuanced about how he said it. Rabbi Sachs attempted the impossible task of speaking to 4 very different target audiences. When I coach writers, authors as part of my job, I generally say, envision your ideal reader and write the book to them. And Rabbi Sachs, it was impossible because he was writing for 4 entirely different audiences. He was writing for the religious Jewish community, he was writing for the general Jewish community, he was writing for the liberal West, and he was writing for religious people around the world. And those are entirely different communities with entirely different sensitivities. And so I think Rabbi Sachs over the years became very sensitive to who he was writing and how he could write in a way that best reached them without upsetting people from the other groups.
So that was quite comprehensive, and just 2 points to add. I agree with everything Gila said. I would be unwise not to do otherwise. But I would say that I think the Politics of Hope in 1997 was also a watershed moment, because that was the first book that I feel like he really addressed wider society in that significant way. And then there were these stories of John Major, who was the Prime Minister at the time, reading it and being impacted. I remember, and then that was the beginning of his relationship with Prime Ministers. So many of you are as familiar as I am with how the Chief Rabbi works in Britain. And I'm a big fan of Rabbi Mervis now, but Rabbi Mervis is a different Chief Rabbi to Rabbi Sachs. I don't know if Rabbi Sachs went out to become the Chief Rabbi that he was, but because he had such a knack of connecting to the wider British society, if you think about it, he took over from Rabbi Jacobowitz. Rabbi Jacobowitz looked like a Jew, and still made a tremendous impact on British society, became a lord, and I'm sure did broadcast, I was too young to really remember, I'm sure broadcast for the BBC, etc., etc. Rabbi Sachs, I think, took it up a notch, and somehow, I think that's what led to this new trajectory of him becoming, ultimately, we joke about it, Mizrahi magazine that often featured him, they have a section called Global Religious Leaders, and he was at once, by mistake, they put that heading over what I was talking about Rabbi Sachs. My friends are making fun of me still now, but it looked like I was the Global Religious Leader. But really, that was a very accurate description of Rabbi Sachs, and I think that was part of the trajectory, because he just had this language and the things that he was trying to address. For him, the Chief Rabbi was this opportunity to not only address his own community, as Gila said, but really to make it. He felt that this was the obvious fulfillment of Judaism. The Jewish national mission was to take Judaism and have it make an impact on the wider world, and he took that very seriously. The other point I'd say is it was refreshing to what those of us who were by then full Hasidim of his, to see when he stepped down from being Chief Rabbi, you could see in his body language and the statements he was making, he felt unshackled, because he no longer had to worry about those controversies that I'm sure will come up, and we've already intimated. One of them we spoke, Peter mentioned, and he didn't have to worry about that anymore, because this being Chief Rabbi was this tremendous delicate balance, making sure that your broad church is still behind you, from the liberal Orthodox, the liberal non-Orthodox community in Britain all the way to the ultra-Orthodox community in Britain. It's an impossible task. He failed at it, but it's not a task you can succeed at. So I feel like that's a hint. It's like the music of last week. Okay, anyway, that's basically
We lost some.
Okay, as well. Now, I just wanted to say, to add to that, that I feel like Rabbi Sachs actually used the medium of social media that no other rabbi used. That, I think, also helped spread his message and spread across the world, and became much more of a world superstar using social media, using YouTube, and that's, I don't think that's unusual for someone of that kind of stature to realize that that was the way to go forward. And especially music-wise, we'll talk about this later, but there were certain things that we did online with him that also propelled him into a certain kind of different area. You know, people saw him as like not just a chief rabbi, not just a rabbi, but also someone who wanted to bring a message in any way he could to the whole world. And I think that was a very important thing. That's how he, my view, seeing that coming from being chief rabbi in 91, and through to when I got to meet him, he started using YouTube, he started using the social media, and I think that also helped him become, as I said, a much. No, we can make one more. I think, yeah.
Okay. So something was mentioned, I'm gonna go with it, that we seem to be transfixed on his relationships that he had with world leaders. I saw this last week on social media. It's like, look, Rabbi Sachs with the Queen, Rabbi Sachs with Tony Blair, Rabbi Sachs with the Pope. Like, we love those pictures. So I'm curious, what do you think it actually says about us, about the Orthodox community, that we're so obsessed with these pictures and there's so much pride in it? Now, is it more than that? Are we looking for some sort of validation? What does it mean? What do you guys think about what it says about contemporary Orthodox life?
So one question that I've been asked quite a bit this past year as people try and wrap their heads around Rabbi Sachs' legacy is, how could he speak so effectively to the entire Jewish world on, across the spectrum, UK Jewry perhaps notwithstanding. And speaking about, say, Rabbi Sachs and the Queen, you've got people on the right who profess to not care at all about things like the Queen, and then you've got people on the left who don't put much stock by rabbis. And yet everybody seemed to be really thrilled at that picture of him handing a Chanukiah to Her Majesty, or giving a siddur to the Pope, or reading a London Times column which mentions the Talmud, or seeing a BBC program about Rosh Hashanah. And we might say, because you asked us a question about us rather than Rabbi Sachs, we might say, well, this is Jewish provincialism. This is us, minority religion, being excited at the fact that there was somebody out there who made us look so good. And Rabbi Sachs really did. Again, we were just incredibly fortunate to have somebody of that stature as our ambassador to the world. But if I were to channel Rabbi Sachs, I would say that the Jewish soul cannot be but be touched by these moments of Kiddush Hashem. And these were moments of Kiddush Hashem. Rabbi Sachs really turned Judaism into what it's always meant to be, into a moral beacon, into a clarion call for justice. And I think all Jews, sometimes perhaps in spite of themselves, could but be profoundly moved by those moments.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go first one time because I don't really have anything to add. I think all I want to add is really give us the same point. I was lucky enough to be in London 3 weeks ago when Tony Blair gave this magnificent, speech and had this conversation about Rabbi Sachs and the impact Rabbi Sachs made on him as a religious leader, but as a friend as well. And we're sitting there, our minds are like, he's continuously referencing, first of all, they have this amazing chavruta where they learned Sefer Bereshit together, and Rabbi Sachs gave Sefer Bereshit, it became this political text to inspire Tony Blair, who was at that time, leader of Great Britain. And there are many other leaders, there are other stories, the Prime Minister of Australia, who wrote a personal handwritten letter of consolation to condolence, thank you, to Lady Elaine, because he also, and he didn't have the same constant relationship with Rabbi Sachs, but whenever Rabbi Sachs was in Australia or the Prime Minister was the Prime Minister of Australia was in Britain, they would get together. And I know for sure that he had often asked Rabbi Sachs for help with his speeches when he wanted to make specific moral points couched in a religious framework. And for us, I think exactly as Gila said, for us as Jews, certainly the people, if we talk about our community, whatever modern orthodoxy means, we're desperate to be part of the world and to have the way we live to be not only a valid lifestyle option, but rather one that can actually impact the world for good. And here was Rabbi Sachs doing it on our behalf in a way that we can't. So really, he was doing it for us. So he was ambassador for Judaism. He was our ambassador, impacting the Queen and Prince Charles. To hear Prince Charles talk about that friendship is also mind-boggling.
Okay, so I'm going to sing one song right now. Actually, it isn't really with this topic, but we'll move on. If you want to actually, no, we can't turn the lights down a bit. Make it a bit more moody. Okay. So we started a tour in 2002. We started a tour to Israel together with the Shabbaton Choir and Roosevelt. And we, one of the places we visited, we started in 2002 because we wanted to do a solidarity through song mission to Israel and try and affect as many communities and bring joy and inspiration to as many communities around Israel as possible. And the first place we actually visited was about 3 months. It was 2002 after the hotel bombing in Netanya. It was a park hotel. And that trip just made me understand what kind of a person Rabbi Sachs was, because we turned up at that hotel and they'd rebuilt the dining room where the bomb took place, and they invited relatives of the people that perished, as well as the workers that were there, and their families, and lots of families from other relatives. And the way he kind of made them feel and made them understand that, they didn't perish for, that their lives meant something, and how much they live on in their lives, and how much they should get inspiration from the type of people that they were, and just using his knowledge and his breadth of language. And in Hebrew, he spoke in Hebrew, perfect Hebrew, by the way. Incredible. And then that was a tour that we thought we have to keep doing this. And somebody called Stephen Levy was a composer, was still a composer, lives in London. He wrote a song, Vihisha Amda, which was perfect for that moment in the Park Hotel. And I'm going to sing it for you now very quickly. I think actually it's a beautiful song. The other Vihisha Amda that everybody knows, unfortunately, came out exactly the same year. So it kind of surpassed this one, but it's a beautiful song. Is that it? Vehi sheyomado la'avoteinu velanu shalom echad milevan amad aleinu v'chalotenu Vehi sheyomado la'avoteinu velanu shalom echad milevan amad aleinu v'chalotenu me'elam sheb'chol dor v'dor עומדים עלינו לכלותנו והקדוש מלכו מצילנו מאדם אלוהים שבכל עומדים עלינו לכלותנו והקדוש מלכו
Wow. Rabbi Saxon's books were widely popular. But there are lots of incredible books, a lot of amazing books on Torah, on the Parsha and everything. So what was it, do you guys think, that made this so different than what other Jewish thinkers were peddling at the same time? And don't just say he's brilliant. Yes, we all know he's brilliant. I'm asking, like, really, what was novel? What was different? What, he was striking a chord in his readership that no one else was doing. What was it?
I'm gonna go first.
Go.
So I'm going to speak as a Jewish educator, as I've been in my life, mostly with teenagers, like high school education. But it doesn't really, it's not really just about that, because I think we all benefit from this. He was what I call a big picture Judaism guy. I went through the same 12, 13 years of Jewish day school education, and then I came here and learned yeshiva, and we spent a lot of time, sometimes inspiring, sometimes less inspiring, looking at the minutiae of what halachic Judaism was. But no one at any point in that entire journey had really forced me to take a step back and look at what Judaism was with Adol, what it was trying to achieve for me as a person, but also for us as a community, and then for the world. And all of his books are framed, I think, on those foundations. And for me, that was just inspiring, because too many of our kids, I think that, as parents, grandparents, that's what we're worried about. Our kids, I think, losing the forest for the trees and being turned off Judaism. And I think that he has created a massive wealth of tools for us to help give a larger picture. That's what I find most inspiring about his books. I think the other thing I'd say is the synthesis between worldly culture and knowledge, and how he both, it's another conversation that's coming to mind, it's Pashat Noach, the Zohar, the light there, and there's a machloket whether that's a light looking out or it's a light that had its own intrinsic light. And he gives a beautiful idea that basically we can learn, Judaism should be a light to the outside, but the outside can also help us to learn Torah, and that's what he did. He used Torah to write books on philosophy and sociology, and he used all of those sciences to help us understand Torah, and I think that's particularly novel.
So I'll pick up from that, I think. You answered as a Jewish educator, I'm going to speak as a Jewish editor. There were two types of Rabbi Sachs books, and you knew which book was which, depending on who got the manuscript first. This is a bit of the behind the scenes. If the manuscript went to the New York publisher first, it was a trade book, meaning it was written with the general non-Jewish public in mind, or the general public in mind. And then we would do the Hebrew version. If the manuscript came to us first, it was a Jewy book. It was a book written expressly for the Jewish community, and we would publish it directly. So I want to answer this question on both levels, the trade books and the Jewy books. Let me begin with the latter. Because yes, I completely agree. Rabbi Sachs's writing was, I think, qualitatively different than the rabbinic writing we are used to. It wasn't about these small questions of halachic minutiae, as you say, or denominational divides, or church and state matters, or the various things we're used to reading from rabbis. He wrote this article for the Times once, which was titled, "I'm a Proud Fundamentalist." Fundamentalist in the sense that Rabbi Sachs went back to the primal principles of Judaism. He described Judaism as a religion of hope and of chesed. He spoke about the Torah as a source of morality and justice. He regarded life as God's call to us for responsibility. He said Judaism is an act of protest against the world that is in the name of the world that can be. This is so much grander. It's so much greater and more inspiring than the kind of rabbinic writings we are used to. And so that's on the level of speaking internally to the Jewish community. Externally, and again, very uniquely, what Rabbi Sachs does is there are many, many, many scholars that have, and to this day, look at the influences of Western culture on Judaism. Rabbi Sachs singularly looks at the contribution of Judaism to Western culture. his thought is varied and so vast, but it's bound by this profound belief that whatever the question, whatever the problem, whatever the challenge, the answer can always be found in the timeless wisdom of the Torah. So for instance, when he speaks about the problems of globalization, he says we need the Jewish idea of particular monotheism, the idea that there's one God but many faiths. When he speaks about the challenges of the free market, he says we have to understand the rabbinic concept of tzedakah. When he speaks about religious violence, he goes back to the Genesis stories of Yitzchak and Ishmael and Yaakov and Esav. When he speaks about social inequality, he reads the prophets. When he addresses tribal conflict, he says we have to understand the biblical idea of Brit covenant. Rabbi Sax's questions were global. His answers were distinctly Jewish. And yes, he was able to bring together these just worlds of knowledge, general philosophy and Jewish thought, Bible and science and technology and sociology and psychology and literature and poetry, and the connections that he made to set him apart from some of the titles that he had. His strokes were broader than any rabbis. His connections were bolder than any academics. And his writing, I think, ultimately is more inspiring than any other Jewish writers today.
Shift this up with another one.
Another one?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, another song.
Okay. I just wanted to quickly introduce this next song. We did a project, Rabbi Sachs and I, for Israel's 60th anniversary. He came up with this idea when he used to come to New York quite a lot to speak, and I'm sorry if it's really loud. I'm sorry.
No, it needs to be
Okay, sorry. You get a bit closer there. Rabbi Sachs used to come to New York a lot to give some lectures and speak in various communities. He actually came to my Riverdale community. I'm the Chazan at the Riverdale Jewish Center in New York still. So I go back a lot. So one of those trips, he called me up. He said, I have an idea. It's Israel's 60th anniversary coming up. Let's do an album of music through history of the state of Israel. Let's start with 1948 and work all the way through of different songs along the way, which I thought was a really, really cool idea. The only thing is, we haven't thought of the songs. So he called me up and he said, let's get together and we'll discuss the songs of the Yorks. I said, fantastic, when can you do it? He said, when can you do it? And I said, not here, not here, not here. We couldn't have time to do it. So in the end, we met in the food court of Grand Central Station. That's where we decided to meet. And we sat there. Do you know where Mendy's used to be, Grand Central Station? Anyone into New York? So we sat there in that food area with everyone eating around us, their sandwiches and whatever they're eating. And Rabbi Sachs comes in with his entourage. And it was like like president had just arrived. He sat down and we hadn't actually thought of bringing a pen and paper. So he actually borrowed a pen from somebody eating, and we took a napkin from the table and we wrote down ideas of the songs. And the way he thought these songs, the way he thought how they would react, how it would connect to what he would his introductions. If you haven't heard the project, I think it's online. It's called Home of Hope, and it's a beautiful, beautiful project in terms of how he introduced every single song and how it made sense to the time and throughout the history. The two final songs, one of them we'll sing at the end of our presentation today, because I think everyone's going to know what song that's going to be. If you know Oscar Shalom, I think that's a good song to sing to finish with. But one of those other songs that I just mentioned before is a song called When You Believe. And this song, again, would be beautiful with a piano, but it doesn't work, unfortunately. Thank you, Simon, for running home to try and get an adapter that would work, and it still didn't work, so I'm really sorry. But this song was originally recorded. You can find it online. Actually, I have it on a project if you want to listen to it separately on Spotify. It's called When You Believe. It's by Stephen Schwartz, who actually wrote music for the movie The Prince of Egypt. And actually, did you know this?
that Rabbi Sachs was an advisor on that movie. Did you know that? Yeah, he was an advisor on that movie. He gave historical permission. That's what the normal word is. To
The movie itself was based a lot on Midrash. So they had a whole panel.
Yeah, so Rabbi Sachs was on that, and he actually asked Stephen Schwartz, only Rabbi Sachs could do this. He actually spoke to Stephen Schwartz and asked him if he could actually use this song, When You Leave, for the project. And not only did he do that, he knew a very, very famous producer in London called Trevor Horn. Trevor Horn, it was a story in itself. His wife, he wasn't Jewish, he married a Jewish lady, and she unfortunately got sick. It was a very unfortunate incident that happened to do with, she got struck by something, and unfortunately she was in coma. And he actually started going to shul in West Hampstead, South Hampstead, Trevor Horn, every single Shabbat, just to sit there. Didn't know a thing, just to sit there and try and for his wife. Anyway, so he agreed. He spoke to Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs says, I'm doing this project. He says to him, great idea, and then I'll produce 2 songs in the name of my wife. And Trevor Horn is actually, I don't know if you know any of this English music. You remember the song "Video Killed the Radio Star"? That's him. I know. Very, yeah. So actually, I was 4. And he's just a very, very famous producer. So to have him on board, you should listen to the arrangement. It's astoundingly good. It's the arranger was the arranger who did the music for Shawshank Redemption. So we had a real production here. I'm now going to sing it without any music, which is going to be interesting. Okay, it goes like this. Many nights we pray with no proof anyone could hear. In our hearts, a hopeful song we barely understood. Now we are not afraid, although we know there's much to fear. We were moving mountains long before we knew we could. Sing a leaf in the chorus. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is spread, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe? Somehow you will. You will when you believe. In this time of fear and prayer so often prove in vain, hope seemed like the summer birds too swiftly flown away. Yet now I'm standing here, my heart's so full I can't explain, seeking faith and speaking words I never thought I'd say. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to give. Who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe? Somehow you will. You will when you Ashira Hashem ki gongama Ashira Hashem ki gongama Bi khamol khamol Hashem Bi khamol khamol Bakosh nachita v'chazdecha Amzugavata nachita v'chazdecha Amzugavata Ashira, Ashira, Ashira. There can be miracles when you believe. The hope is spread, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles can achieve. When you believe, somehow you will. You will when you believe. When you
Wow, okay, so something that has come up over and over again is Rabbi Sachs' unique talent of taking these lofty philosophical ideas and making them accessible to kids, to high school students, to everyone, like everyone can read the book and get something. Something that I don't know how he did, I can't do it. When I'm trying to explain something philosophical to my kids, I'm like, just look at the Rabbi Sachs books. Like he knows how to do it, read it, he says it better than I could say it. So my question is, first, like, where did he learn that skill? That's an incredible skill to have. Was it something intentional that he sat down and said, okay, here's my idea. I'm gonna try and get it down to the most simplest level, or did something that just come naturally to him?
I think I first. Then it's
I feel like possibly you're right, I should go first because you have more to say about this, but.
I'm not gonna go at all.
So Rabbi Sachs famously had many titles, and he famously said the one he values the most is rabbi, as in teacher, like Moshe Rabbeinu, who also could have many titles. So, you know, for me, that was always wonderful to hear. In fact, I read the new book that just came out, which is a collection of his writings and broadcasts that have never been published before, called The Power of Ideas. So I'm dipping in and out. It's a wonderful book, just very short ideas that he wrote or broadcast. And I read one today where he said, and I've never heard him actually say this, but it was so wonderful to say. It was after he finished being chief rabbi, and he went back to New York to lecture. He was guest professor at both NYU and YU, and he said, you know, in this BBC broadcast, he said, I'm going back to my first love, my first passion, teaching. So that, you know, makes me feel super warm and inspired inside that that's who he was. He was primarily a teacher and a master teacher, because that's what it means to be a teacher, is you can take complex ideas and you can say them to a middle school kid and they'll get it. So what was brilliant about Rabbi Sachs, I think, is not only that he could do that he wrote, I think, the more and more you read Covenant Conversation, you realize that the book, the very complex philosophical ideas that he both shared over others and wrote himself are also found in his weekly Divrei Torah, written in a much simpler and more accessible way. He famously tells the story. There's a couple of books that don't fit into either of those categories, either the more complex philosophy or the jury books, which, you know, the Parsha books or the liturgy, the books on Tefillah. And the most famous one is called Celebrating Life. And it's beautiful. It's like life affirming. And he wrote it for his mother, because his mother said, Jonathan, when are you going to write a book I can understand? And he wrote this book, and it's full of beautiful stories. Again, we talked about stories. He was a master educator in how he used stories as an educational tool. He also framed it in a philosophical way. He said that Judaism is less truth through a system, it's more truth as narrative, truth as story. And that's what the Torah is. It's a narrative and a story of the Jewish people, and in it, explaining what the philosophy of Judaism is. So I'd say that. I think even most of his complex philosophy books are still quite accessible. It takes a little bit more work, but I think they are. And then I think that and Shim mentioned this about social media. I think he was adamant that he would reach as many people with his ideas as possible. So not only did he manage to adapt the ideas and say them in more accessible ways, but he found other media and mediums where the people were. So he used social media and he used YouTube, and he was a magnificent orator. We all know that. We've all experienced that. And then, lucky for me, is that 5 or 6 years ago, he asked for my help to take his ideas. And like any, it was like a dream gig, because they were quite successful. These like the family edition of the Covenant Conversation. The brilliance is not me, it's Rabbi Sachs. I just packaged it in a way that I hope families can access it. But the brilliance is still Rabbi Sachs, because in the fact when I developed these family editions of 2 cycles of covenant conversation, so I rarely changed any of his words. I sectioned it off and I added a story and I added reflection questions and answers. But the words themselves, I think any family can sit with their kids, certainly middle school age kids and up, and use them directly. So I think it's a wonderful question. I've been honored to be part of that process, but the brilliance was really him and Alvin White.
So for the past year, in fact, right after Rabbi Sachs's death, I joined this very small group that made it its mission to spend a year reading through all of Rabbi Sachs's books from the very, very beginning. Anyway, the point is we started with the books nobody reads. And I have to say, and I imagine he'll forgive me for saying this, the books that he wrote in his 40s are not that. They're really not. They are heavy, they are dense, they use a lot of jargon. And it really is only as we sort of reach the books that he writes in his late 50s and 60s and early 70s ultimately, that we encounter that sort of just effortless, sweeping, glittering prose that Rabbi Sachs was so known for. I mentioned earlier how prose is very much determined by the ideal reader that the author has in his or her mind's eye when they write. And I think what is happening for Rabbi Sachs, and I didn't discuss this with him, but I'm going to hypothesize as an editor, that gradually his ideal reader changed from the Cambridge Don to the United Synagogue congregant. It took him a long time, quite a few books, but he gradually sheds all of the jargon, all of the complex sentence structure, and really learns to put things down in the simplest, most straightforward, most beautiful, crystal clear way. As I think he goes from academic to rabbi, as he starts writing the sort of thing that he envisions his congregants, your average intelligent but unintellectual United Synagogue person. And I will say just, because his very savvy use of social media was used, and he was really the king of sound bites. It's almost unfair the way he can take this really complex idea and get it into a 28-word sentence, and it's perfect. So one of possibly my most embarrassing moment ever with Rabbi Sachs happened at this very first event that I moderated for him. And as I mentioned, it was a very large event. There were 1,000 people in this massive hall in Binyanei Mount, and there were another 1,000 out the door who were upset at not being able to get in because we were at capacity. And so part of what we did was we had somebody live tweet all of the Rabbi Sachs' speech. And so the next day we were kind of debriefing, and I said to him, I'm so embarrassed to think about it now, I was thinking, well, he's 65. So I said, well, Rabbi Sachs, somebody was transmitting via the internet sound bites of your speech to the people outside. And he looked at me and he said, they were live tweeting. And I was so here I was trying to think that there was something in this word Rabbi Sachs wasn't familiar with, of course, how wrong I was. But I think, he did manage to get it down to an art form, that tweet we so love to deride, but he used the tweet, the 150 characters, better than really any writer alive.
I just want to add that I think Diane Vinstock, the Hesped at his The Fire, talks about this as well, that he almost was proud to write his early books that no one would understand.
He said, and I quote, "I am aiming for maximum unreadability."
Right, exactly. What I find so inspiring is he never stopped learning. So that because also I re-listened to the Desert Island Discs interview, which was when he just became chief rabbi, or even maybe before. And he sounds so stuffy and so tight. And do you remember the choice of music that he chose? So he chose beautiful music, but very high end. He chose classical music and some classics in Iran, but the Rabbi Sachs that we remember now is the Rabbi Sachs that would talk about Eminem and you know, oh, he loved them.
Hamilton, one of his last birthdays, his family took him to see Hamilton. And he came out mesmerized. I mean, he came out spitting rhymes. He was like doing the rap of Hamilton. In his, I'm not going to imitate him, but he does this like, the art of the comedy. He does these raps in his, you know, voice of God, Rabbi Sachs voice. But one thing which was fascinating was his really strong identification with Alexander Hamilton. One of the lyrics on the musical is, why do you write like you're running out of time? And Rabbi Sachs was really a man who felt like the work was so great and the time was so scarce. He was ill twice before, and he was writing like he was running out of time.
You wrote a year's worth of covenant and conversation ahead of time.
Oh, he did that.
Yeah.
I did that every year.
Oh, okay.
It's not that was like Pakal. He did that.
One more thing is that he used the media very well in the sense that did you watch these animations that he did?
Yeah.
I thought that was incredible how he took, was it the history of Israel?
Why am a Jew?
Why am a Jew? That one. That was unbelievable. And he used the animation so well to fit what
So I
he was
just
trying
want
to
to
say.
say, well, he didn't draw it. No,
He could do everything else but drawing.
But what his brilliance was, he had this team that he trusted in, and I've heard many times these kind of conversations where they would pitch things to him, and that one Duffy he wasn't sure about. And when they saw it, and it's like a caricature of him, he didn't like it, Elaine didn't like it, and it was a bit of a crisis because they invested a lot of money in it. And Dan Sackers, I don't know if this is going to go anywhere publicly, but I thought we have to. I feel like I have to say that Dan Sacker, who's kind of communications guy, he's the one tweeting for him. Like I once got a shout out from Rabbi Sachs's Facebook account, and it looked like it was Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs didn't know how to log onto Facebook, but he knew why it was important, and he knew that Dan Sacker, who's a communications guy, he should trust in him implicitly. So after that animation thing, that Dan said, just trust me. It's going to really, and it changed.
It's a huge. It's got so many views out, not just outside the Jewish world. People have like attached themselves to understand what Jew is, and I think that was the brilliance of how he managed to do that. I don't know anyone else like that. Such a breadth of being able to affect so many people. We have questions.
Yeah, we do have questions.
Okay.
Yeah, we only have like 3-4 minutes left, so let's do one question and then Shim, you and some. Yeah.
So just talk a little bit about what the rest of the world believes Rabbi Sachs, not the leaders, but the Joe Schmo out there. I listened to a great podcast called Morality in the 21st Century, where he interviews students in England, not Jewish students, about what morality is. And I'd be really curious to know the impact that he had on the rest of the world. We know the impact he's had on our world and on leadership. What about the rest of the world?
I just asked my husband to tell the story.
Stand up, please.
Tell the Alsh story.
So it's fun. It's funny you say that because we talk about the leaders and how they've been impacted. You're asking the person on the street. I don't know that any of us know. I don't know. Like, I can tell you that I got approached by a Christian academic, kind of Bible periodical in America to write something on him. So Christians everywhere, especially in America. So we know about that. But I don't know if that's who you're talking about.
I can tell you, if you go up to somebody in the street in England, a non-Jewish person in the street, you say, "Tell me one Jew you've heard of," and you can think of someone who has affected you in some way. They will all say, "Oh, I said."
I mean, if they listen to Radio 4, that's a big, I don't know average, but the story my wife is intimating, which I'll do very quickly. I don't know those of you who are, so I'm a little bit of a football fan, soccer fan. No, this is not the one. I'm taking a different one. It's actually no. But it is because this person is not. Look, he's my legend as a footballer, but he's just a Joe Schmo on the street. He just happens to be very good at football. And then he was also an alcoholic and got back, to rebuild his life. So he's kind of that kind of story. He's called Tony Adams, for those of you who might know him. So he was England captain, Arsenal captain. Anyway, he launched Rabbi Nicky List in Highgate Synagogue, had a book launch for Tony Adams' new book about his life story, which is quite an inspiring story. I often teach it in Elul because he really turned his life around. Anyway, Tony Adams comes into the shul, and Nicky List, who's also a big Arsenal fan, Arsenal's a football team, by the way. I'm saying anything anyway. Anyway, and he wants to give him a present. He can't want to give him art. I'll give him lessons in leadership. So that's one of Rabbi Sachs's covenant conversation cycles, but he themed it in leadership, and it's brilliant. Very nice. Anyway, a year later or something like that, my friend Nikki Liss, who was like 2 years below me in school, happened to get an invite to some event at Arsenal where they're screening a documentary, and all the players are there. Not sure how Nikki wrangled that. He sees himself as being an Arsenal rabbi.
It's not working.
Anyway, Tony Adams makes a beeline for him and says, I've just finished your book for the second time. And Nikki's like, you must be mistaken, I've never written a book. It's the book you gave me when I came to your synagogue. So Tony Adams, this guy who's, a Jewish man on the street, found lessons in leadership, which is Divrei Torah on the whole Torah, to be very, very inspiring, especially leadership. So it's an anecdote. I don't know if that represents your average person on the street. But cool. So for me, it was like.
I had the rather stressful position of sometimes being on the receiving end of emails intended for Rabbi Sachs, because often if they didn't find his office email, they'd find the publisher, and I'd get those emails. And I could tell you that the number of emails that I had to field, which were from some average persons from nowhere USA, saying your books, my God, your books, but I believe in Jesus, so what do I do? And just one question after the next. And I mean, this is a bit more than anecdotal. If you had gone over his Facebook page the week and the month he died, which I did rather obsessively because I couldn't be at a shiva, as no one could, the number of non-Jews who just wrote and said, I'm not Jewish, but this man showed me a way to God. I'm not Jewish, but this man helped me lift my life, put back my life back together when it was falling apart. I'm not Jewish, but this man gave me a new sense of spirituality. I'm not Jewish, but because I read this book, I patched things up with my kids. One testimonial after the next of people who took responsibility for their lives, of people who found new meaning and new purpose, of people who found God as a result of Rabbi Sachs. And, I'm not sure that distinction between the important people and the Jewish laws is valid, because when Prince Charles speaks about Rabbi Sachs, he doesn't speak about, his political advice specifically. He calls him my trusted advisor. And I'm sure a lot of their conversations were personal and about, the most existential subjects. And I'll say one more thing, and that is, I don't quite remember this story. I'm sure I will butcher it, but Rabbi Sachs tells the story about being at this conference, this sort of cross-religious conference somewhere. And I'm going to be very specific on the detail. And at some point, he says these two Sikhs walk up to him, these two Sikh students, and he wants to correct them and say, no, you don't want me, you want the Sikh guy over there. And they say, no, it's you we want, because we read the dignity of difference, and you giving the Jews pride to be Jewish gave us the pride to be Sikhs. So I think he gave religious people around the world reason to be proud of being religious, because religious is the least cool thing you could be these days. I think he gave conservatives strong philosophical backing for why we want to hold on to certain institutions and traditions. And I think he gave your Joe Schmo a pathway to God.
We're good with time, Shem, can you end?
We're good with time?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's end with a song that maybe some of you know. Just a bit of background on this quickly. This was the last song that we thought of to do for the Home of Hope project, and it actually became a global YouTube before YouTube was like suddenly the medium that everyone used to try and get as many hits as possible. The YouTube back in 2008 was very different to the one it is now.
This video basically made YouTube what it was.
I think so, yeah. You could actually do that to Rabbi Sachs. I think, he made YouTube what it was today. It was a song written again by Stephen Levy. And it actually, I think, got up to 3.4 million hits, which isn't bad for a Jewish song. Check it out online. And it was recorded in the same studio that they recorded Live Aid. Remember Live Aid? Band-Aid? What was Live-Aid? Oh, Live-Aid was the London concert, yeah, Band-Aid, sorry, Band-Aid. Also, there's a bit at the beginning, if you look at the beginning, there's a piano, I'm very excited about this, that's what I'm saying about it. There's a bit at the beginning where we're practicing on the piano, the video. That piano was Freddie Mercury recorded Bohemian Rhapsody on that piano. So it's like ding, 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 ding. It was very exciting. Anyway, so it was kind of, give it kind of a Band-Aid feel for this project. And we had the Charlton Choir, we had a school from, what was the school in Pinner? No, it wasn't, it was just one school. Just one school, it wasn't Sinai. It was. Yeah, what I was sure was the. Yeah, it turns out.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't because of the video. Okay, so that school and it just became a global hit, thank God. And what's very cool, I just remember this, in Korea, South Korea, I think it was South Korea, they had, I don't know if you saw this video, but they had at least an arena filled with like 30,000 people, and the school, they had a visitor, the president of Israel came to visit South Korea, and the school kids sang this Asa Shalom. It's on the YouTube somewhere, so you should do that. Okay, if you know it, please join me. Asa Shalom. Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol Yisrael, v'yimeru, amen. I'm just going to interrupt one before we continue. Rabbi Sachs always sang this song wherever he went with us. We did it, he had a goodbye event at the Barbican Center, a retiring event as chief rabbi, and he came on stage and sang with us in Trafalgar Square when we used to have the Israel rally. He'd come on stage and sing. This is the only song you hear him sing, by the way. Doesn't sing much. You'll find him singing on YouTube this song. Okay, one time. Oh, Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol Yisrael, v'yimeru, amen. Shalom, Shalom Mirama, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol Yisrael, v'yimeru.
That I didn't know before, and inspired now to go and read all of his writings now, even the earlier stuff that they were really do. I'll go backwards, right?
No, start with like 12 weeks ago.
Okay, like 12 weeks ago. Okay, I have a task ahead of me, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we really thank you so much for that. It was incredibly